rid of this. Okay, yes. So let's start, and meanwhile, hopefully Jose will rejoin. So hello everyone again. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Welcome to the 17th edition of the Neurocognitive Linguistics Circle. My name is Paul Bozila. I'll be your host. And as always, we are recording this session for all those who would have liked to attend but cannot. This is a sort of special edition for several reasons. First, because for the first time, this event is also somehow part of an master program class that I'm teaching to our digital humanities students at University of Bucharest, who are with us today. So I'm glad, as CELINE host, I'm glad that we have them in the audience. As their teacher, I'm glad that we have Jose to speak about these topics he's going to present, because these are very relevant to the class I'm teaching to them. So I'm glad. I'm doubly glad, let's say. It's also special because it's a sort of as it was announced in the title, it's the full lecture. So it's the extended version of a presentation that Jose has already done before in a shorter form. And that was also because some planning issues I had back then. We had this meeting in November, and both Jose and I did. I mean, none of us realized that we had planned it for Thanksgiving Day. So a lot of people from the United States that would have liked to join were not there, with the exception of John Paul, who I think is not here today. That's probably because he already knows this presentation. So we decided to rerun it. Dan is here with us today. Maybe someone else will join. We'll see. Well, anyways, the third reason for which is a special edition, let's say, is also the topic. Jose is going to talk about a relational interpretation of some linguistic productions, which is within this framework of relational network theory, which is a linguistic model that we are trying to sort of promote at CELINE. And last but not least, Jose is also an old friend of both R&T and CELINE. So that's also a special occasion to have him with us today. Thank you very much for being here, Jose. I hope you can hear us. I see you have reconnected. Jose, can you hear us? Okay, so now let's hope that not only the camera is wrong, but also the microphone. Okay. So, okay, he left again. So the idea was that it's a special occasion, special edition for several reasons. And being a special occasion, being a special edition, implies, as we see now, also some special technical problems. So let's hope we overcome those. Okay, I was going to wait for him to introduce him, but I'll go ahead and tell you who Jose is. So there are many things I could say about him, but I will just mention a few of them. Jose María Gil holds a degree in humanities from the National University of Mar del Plata in Argentina. He has carried out postgraduate research at the University of Birmingham in England with the British Council Scholarship and earned his PhD in philosophy from the University of La Plata in Argentina. He also completed a postdoctoral research at Rice University in USA with a Fulbright grant. He has taught at the primary, secondary, and university levels, both undergraduate and graduate students. Thanks to several international grants and fellowships, he has worked in England, Mexico, Italy, and the US, also in China, Uruguay, and Peru. He has published extensively on linguistics, philosophy of science, and education. He's a full professor of logic and thesis workshop in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Mar del Plata, and an independent researcher at Argentina's National Council for Scientific and Technical Research, CONICET. His current research focuses on teaching language through literature with a particular emphasis on Borges' texts in secondary education. He also directs the interdisciplinary project Dialéctica Virtuosa de la Educación, that is Virtuous Dialectic of Education, under which he coordinates several international teaching, research, and development agreements. And also, I should say this, together with Adolfo Garcia, he translated into Spanish Sidney Lamb's seminal book, Pathways of the Brain, in which the neurological plausible version of relational network theory is presented. So Jose plans to tell us more about this theory today, and he will also talk about some anomalous cases which he explains using this relational model that is using relational network theory. So this would be the moment when I thank him. Jose, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great.
Thank you very much for this
Hopefully
presentation.
you heard part of the presentation. Once again, thanks for accepting my invitation. Even if we cannot see you, we can follow your presentation and listen to it. So thanks again. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very happy to have the opportunity of developing this lecture. I had to have the opportunity to talk with you about the most important aspects of relational network theory. I'm very sorry for this unexpected problem, but I think that if I share my screen, I will be able to talk with you about these issues, and hopefully I will make a reasonably good presentation about the main aspects of relational network theory. If you have any question or comment, please just interrupt me because I have some problems with my screen, and maybe you are interested in saying something or asking some question. Of course, feel free to say whatever you want.
We also have Subi with us. She's helping me with the technical aspects. So if anyone cannot ask orally, you can also put your question in the chat. Subi will interrupt Jose and let him know there's a question there.
Oh, that's right. Thank you for this, for mentioning that. Okay. Well, I think that I will spend a little. Is is my screen being shared now?
No.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, now it's coming up, I think. Okay, yeah, we can see it. And if you go to presentation mode, it would be even better.
They asked me if I can connect from the phone also. I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
No, don't worry about it.
I don't have the phone here. I'm sorry.
Just go to presentation mode.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
Great. And that's the title of the presentation, a relational account of communication on the basis of anomalous cases. As Paul kindly said before, I work for the National University of Mar del Plata and the National Council of Scientific and Technological Research of Argentina. My hometown is Mar del Plata, which is a city beside the sea. You have some pictures here. I'm talking to you from the far south, very close to the end of the world. My hometown is relatively cold in winter and relatively warm in summer. It's an important resort during summer vacations. And we also have a good university. Here you have some pics of my city. I hope to see you at least once here sometime. And this is Sidney Lamb, the creator of relational network theory. Thanks to a Fulbright scholarship, he visited Mar del Plata in 2011, and he presented the Spanish version of his book, Pathways of the Brain, which was translated by Adolfo and me. Here you have Rice University. Here is Sedlam, which is not only an outstanding scholar, but also a very kind person. He's playing here with my son when he was a little kid in Houston. When I was there, thanks to a Fulbright scholarship, similar to the one that Paul was given some years ago. Okay, here's the roadmap that I will try to follow with you today. The title of the presentation is A Relational Account of Language, Structure, and Communication on the basis of anomalous cases. But I will also aim at developing some crucial aspects of relational network theory that are very useful in order to understand this particular theory of language structure and language use. First of all, I will try to analyze with you how the linguistic system is a system of relationships. Then we will make some reference to the importance of neurological evidence of this theory, and we will try to account for the fact that relational network theory has a neurological plausibility. The third part of this presentation will be about a relational account of the slips of the tongue. And finally, we will make reference to the relational network the relational nature of language as revealed through anomalous and creative cases, which are crucially important because such anomalous, such odd, such weird cases, and also the creative ones, are usually discarded by other linguistic theories. On the other hand, we will see that they are not peripheric, but central cases for relational network theory. Sorry, and that's not the end of the story, because it's also important that this theory that we are considering today is able to account for these apparently anomalous cases that other theories could not simply explain. And in epistemological terms, I think that we could suggest that a linguistic theory should aim at explaining every case of linguistic existence, and not only the cases that it is intended to, or some cases that scholars sometimes select for their own convenience. Okay, so in dealing with the relational account of language structure and also of communication on the basis of anomalous cases, there is a famous, or there is a relatively well-known quotation at the beginning of the book Pathways of the Brain that says the following: also, most current linguistics fails to consider various kinds of anomalous data, which actually reveal very important information about the structure of the mental system which underlies our linguistic abilities, including the slip of the tongue and unintentional paths. This is something that we were mentioning before. Other linguistic theories consider that these cases are odd, weird, perhaps not properly linguistic at all, but on the other hand, they are very important, they are characteristic, they are idiosyncratic in order to develop a good model of a relational theory of language. One of the main linguists that belongs to the traditional, to the relational tradition of linguistics is the Danish linguist Louis Jensler, who suggested in his famous book Prolegomena to language theory, or Prolegomena to language studies, that we should admit that the linguistic system is mainly a system of relations, and that in such linguistic system, elements do not exist in isolation. Here we have some key expressions that have been developed by Saussure and also by Jensler. And the main idea here that we have to highlight is that the language system is a network of relationships, that we don't have something like discrete or independent units in the linguistic systems, but the elements of the linguistic system are elements just because they are connected and related to other elements. From the properly relational point of view developed by Sidney Lamb, we will have that information, we will have the hypothesis that information is in the connectivity, and the elements of the linguistic system are nodes or connections are connections. We could say nodes and connections. So linguistic information is in the relationships. Okay, there are not discrete or blocks in the linguistic system. Labels that are written in the relational networks that we are going to consider and analyze today must be interpreted as precisely labels, as signals that help us to understand relational networks. As we can see in this first example, there is conceptual, lexical, and phonological information are represented in relational networks. For example, here, the central node that we have, where there is a triangle in the base and something like a bracket in the upper part, it's a node, and it's a lexical node. The label cat is written there in order to help readers to interpret the information that is represented there. And as we see, the phonological information is at the base of the figure. We have the notes corresponding for phonemes that are represented as K, A, T, and in the upper part of the figure, we have some information that corresponds to conceptual information. Again, we have to emphasize the fact that the words that are written there are not strictly components of the relational system. Okay, here we have, I'm not going to analyze deeply this information because it will be a class or a complete lecture in itself, but we have there the different types of nodes of relational network theory considered in abstract notation. For example, if we see I don't know if you can see the arrow when I move it. Can you see it? Okay, here we have the downward and ordered and, which is a type of node that represents that information, downward information, comes first from A to B and later to C. If we consider in the previous image, we have cat. In order to verbalize cat, first activation goes to K, then to A, then to T. Here we have a downward ordered and node. It should be also mentioned that information here in such abstract networks is bidirectional. We can consider information downward and upwards, and they are able to represent not only linguistic production, but also linguistic comprehension. This is another asset of relational network theory. For example, here on the other extreme of the figure, we have the downward and ordered and. We have that information from A goes simultaneously to B and C, and this would be the case of a phoneme whose features are all activated together. For example, if you consider the phoneme K in English or Spanish, I think that it should be also the case in Romanian. It's vela, it's stop, it's voiceless, k. Okay, all such features are activated together. So the linguistic system is a network of relationships. Here we have, for example, an upward and ordered and that helps us to show the fact that the expression is the verb to be in third person present activates at the same time all this semantic information, present, be, third person singular. This is an order because all the information that is integrated by present, be, third person singular is a compound, is a series of activation, all whose elements are activated together. And they have to be activated together, but because the difference between an AND node and an OR node is a difference based on the concepts developed by Saussure that are paradigmatic and syntagmatic relationships. And nodes account for syntagmatic relationships of the elements that are present in the sequence. On the other hand, all relationships account for paradigmatic relationships, that is to say, elements that are not necessarily realized in the sequence, but are present in the linguistic system. Here we have a complex case here, but very interesting. that help us to show that relational network theory can also account for intended puns. For example, this is the case: a duck walks into a bar and asks for a beer. The bartender sits and the duck says, "Put it on my bill." The pun is playing with the intentional ambiguity of bill, which activates at the same time the concepts big and account. This is another or upward node, an upward, another, or node. It sends activation, bill sends activation both at the same time to big and account. And in this case, the two nodes at the semantic level are activated. But in other contexts, it could have been the case that only one of these nodes could have been activated. For example, if we are talking about yes, please bring me the bill when we are in a restaurant and there are no ducks there. The people will interpret only account, but bill is sending activation both to the two concepts which are connected to the lexical node. Here we have the case of disambiguation. The concept that receives more activation will be, of course, activated. If we are talking about an account in a bar, bill will receive activation. If we are talking about tax, big will receive activation. Here we have another figure that helps us to show how the relational network theory is successful when accounting for some basic linguistic phenomena such as synonymy or polysemy. Here we have the representation of linguistic information around the lexeme heart. Okay, here we have the lexemic node for heart. Heart connects upward to difficult and hard. It sends both information to, it sends simultaneously information to the concepts hard and difficult. So relational network theories, relational networks, schemes are useful in order to represent polysemy. Polysemy can be interpreted as the connection between a lexemic node and more than one conceptual or semantic node. On the other hand, as you see, the concept for difficult, here we have represented the relation of synonymy, because difficult is connected downwards both to the concept for difficult is connected downwards both to the lexemic node for difficult and the lexemic node for hard. So this is synonymy. Synonymy can be interpreted as the connection between a semantic node and more than one lexemic node. And as you can also see here, we have at the top of the figure semantic information. In the middle, we have lexemic information. On the base, we have phonological information. Heart is activated at the phonological level by means of the nodes corresponding to the phonemes A, he, R, D. And in its turn, we have here another downward and no, which shows us that the phoneme that is represented by D is activated simultaneously by different nodes, like apical, closed, or maybe dental. Oh, you see? So, different types of nodes are able to represent phonological, lexical, semantic information. those nodes are also able to represent linguistic production and linguistic comprehension, because if we consider, again, that when we go from the upper part of the diagram to the bottom, to the basis of the figure, we are representing, when going in the top-down direction, we are represented, roughly speaking, linguistic production. On the other hand, if we go from the bottom to the upper part, in the bottom-up direction, we are representing linguistic comprehension. That is to say, in linguistic production, we go from meanings to phonology. On the other hand, in linguistic comprehension, we go from phonology to meanings. Here we have another interesting case. Here we have the downward ordered OR. If we have, for example, the meaning or the concept water, we have that water can be realized by means of, or is connected, the meaning water is connected to the lexemic node for water, and also to the lexemic node to H2O, which is the chemical form of water. But this technical device helps us to show that water is the default option. It's the option that will be activated in common situations. On the other hand, the presence option, H2O, is the one that is activated when the meanings corresponding to chemical information are activated. So we have different types of nodes that help to account for linguistic structure and linguistic use. For example, here we have information around cat and bat in figure 2 here. We have that cat, the lexemic node for cat and the lexemic node for bat. They are connected, of course, to the same nodes at the phonological level, they are connected with the same phonological nodes. This is very interesting because we have only one node for the phoneme corresponding for T, for the phoneme corresponding for A, and so on. The difference between cat and bat is in phonological terms is the presence of B or K, or the phonemes corresponding to those, the phonemes corresponding to the elements that are, the phonemes that are being represented here by means of the letters B and K. It should also be mentioned here that we have a semicircle here with an N inside. In some parts of the book Pathways of the Brain and other articles, Lamb suggests that at the semantic level, at the conceptual level, when representing meanings, we have threshold nodes that are activated by the activation, this redundance is legitimate here, that so that some nodes, such threshold nodes, are activated when there is enough activation. For example, cat will be activated when other meanings are also activated. For example, animal, pet, meow. And not only other concepts in the linguistic systems, but maybe information coming from other cognitive systems. For example, information coming from the auditive system, like the noise made by the cats, information about the visual system, and so on. So this is another aspect that is really important for relational network theory, and it is the fact that it is assumed, it is suggested, it is accepted that linguistic information is strongly connected with other cognitive systems, like vision, like the auditive system, like the somatosensory system, and so on. The olfactory system included. This is a fact that simply is not considered by most linguistic theories, which usually analyze linguistic information in isolation, as if linguistic information was not connected with other cognitive systems. Okay, here we have in this threshold node that we have here, we have an n. This n means that okay, it's a possible number which nobody knows precisely which number is, but it's a number that it's an n. It's a number that indicates, it's a symbol that here helps us to indicate that at least some incoming information from different concepts should be activated in order to activate such threshold nodes. Threshold nodes are in this model of abstract notation as something like an intermediate type of node between the AND node and the OR node. Okay, here we have again a downward another OR, which helps us to show that, for example, the SIM node for kitty will be activated if we have a familiar register, maybe as an incoming concept. We have synonymy represented here, cat and kitty, which are not, of course, perfect synonyms. Perfect synonyms do not exist in the linguistic system. Here for bat, we have stick or flying mouse, okay? Polysemy is represented there. Again, we should mention that relational network theories account for meanings, lexical information, phonological information, that considering top-down, we go from content to expression, and considering bottom-up, we go from expression to content, and that it is also connected with linguistic production and linguistic comprehension. Here we have another interesting example coming from football culture. Tolfan, they say in Icelandic, in the language spoken in Iceland, this Nordic country, Tolfan means at the same time 12 and Iceland soccer fans, like they play number 12. This is something very common in football culture. And Tolfan is integrated by tool, the meaning for tool, and fan by soccer fans. So Tolfan, here we have some shadow meanings here. This is another interesting aspect of relational network theories. We are just showing a few examples, but as we can see, there are different cases, different linguistic phenomena that are clearly explained in terms of relational network theories. Here we have something that we could call shadow meanings. That is to say, the fact that in the lexical node for Tolfan, we also have the elements tol and fan, soccer fan, which are in their turn connected to soccer fan and to tool. Of course, that relational network theory can be used in order to account for those phenomena in every language. Here we have an example coming from Mapudungun, which is the language spoken by the Mapuche people in South America. They live in the northern Patagonia, both in Chile and Argentina. It's a beautiful language. Here we have the word or the lexemic note for ruca, house, which is connected to different meanings, which can be house, building, home, and of course, downwards, connected to phonological information. Here we have that polysemy and synonymy can also be explained, of course, in Mapudungun. I mean, relational network theory can also help us to account for polysemy, synonymy, the complex connection between lexemic information and semantic information in Mapudungun. Here we have some Mapuche persons skiing in northern Patagonia. And here we have the Mapuche flag, and in the map you can take a look of the region where generally Mapuche people are. Here's my city. If you see the arrow, I'm in the east of the country. Mapuche people are on the west, close to the Andes. Here we have a picture of the mountains and Mapuche skiing. Here we have another example with shadow meanings. Cuicuipanji means ruca roof. It's connected to such expression, but in the word cuicuipanji, we have that cuicui means bridge, and panji connects to puma, the South American lion. Okay, it's like a giant cat. It's very beautiful. Here we have represented again synonymy, puma. The pangi and tapial are words for puma, for lion, South American lion. Muku and cuicui are words for bridge. And cuicuipanji, which is the ruca roof, is literally the bridge of the lion, the bridge of the puma. But those meanings are shadow meanings that are represented there, and that can be clearly accounted for in terms of relational terms. The name of my city, my hometown, Mar del Plata. Mar del Plata is literally Sea of Silver, but you know, Argentina, the name of my country, has its origins in Argentum, which is silver, because the Spaniards who came here believed that there was a lot of silver there, and there are other explanations, but many names in my country have to do with silver, with Argentum, silver in Latin, and Mar del Plata is a full expression. It's a complex lexeme, but it's learned as only one word by Spanish speakers, particularly in Argentina. But all these shadow meanings are also included in the name Mar del Plata. You have Mar del Plata city connected to the sequence Mar del Plata, but also you have sea, you have the preposition which means of, and plata, which is silver, but it is connected also to maybe to Argentina. In the case of Spanish speakers, particularly in South America, connected to the River Plate region. Plata means not only the metal, silver, but also the region of the River Plate. Uruguay, for example, is another nation, and it is also part of the River Plate region. So, of course, if you have any question or comment, please feel free to ask or to say something, and I would be very glad to hear you. Here we have in this figure the node corresponding, for example, to the lexeme gato, cat. I think that in Romanian is pisica, and we can we can analyze here, we can consider here that for every scheme in abstract or compact notation, at the left of the figure, we have a triangle. This triangle means an AND node. We have first that if we go from meaning, from content to expression, we have the meaning cat. Okay, cat activates the lexeme for gato in the case of the Spanish speakers. And first the syllable ga will be activated, and then the syllable to will be activated. If we go from expression to content, we will have that ga will be activated first, and then to, and when the whole sequence is activated, it will send activation to the lexeme gato, which in its turn will send activation to the meaning corresponding to cat. For every figure in compact or abstract notation, we have two figures in, this is a very complex theme of the theory, but it can be shown here, it can be exemplified. We have two figures in narrow notation. For every figure in compact or abstract notation, we have two figures in narrow notation. Why? Well, because figures in abstract notation are bidirectional. They show both upward and downward activation. On the other hand, figures in narrow notation represent only one direction. For example, this here we have the figure in the center, a figure in upward notation, considering narrow notation. First, we have that ga, the note for ga, sends activation to gato, and then to. So, and we have to fulfill this threshold. It has to be satisfied by two activations, the two syllables, ga and to. Okay, this is what is shown here. This is information that is shown here. On the other hand, if we consider downward notation for narrow notation, the lexemic note for gato will send activation first to ga and then to to. This is a technical issue, but it can be mentioned in order to consider that the notational device of relational network theory is very complex, is very interesting, and it has different levels of complexity and delicacy. Lamb has suggested that this relational network device, or this relational network convention for linguistic notation, is very important because it helps us to develop a notational system that is completely different from the products of the linguistic system. The products of the linguistic system are, for example, the symbols that we represent here, like gato, like pisica, like cat. But inside in the linguistic system, there are not symbols. We have only nodes and connections. We have unnodes or nodes, connections, activations. So relational network theory has been able to develop a notational system that helps to understand how the linguistic system is and why the linguistic system is in fact a system of relationships. So we have more differences between compact and narrow notation. This may be a rather technical issue that could be considered, but it's a little bit complex, like every interesting fact here. For example, here in this image, we could see that we have one network in abstract notation. Okay, here we have the lexemic node for gato. Gato is the polysemic word in Spanish, at least in the River Plate, it can be connected to all these meanings. Here we have a prototypical one, which is the feline, the domestic animal, the pet cat, which is activated by other meanings, by other concepts, okay? This is the threshold node. For example, if we have meow and feline, the meaning for cat will be activated. And of course, at the bottom of the figure, we have phonological information. So for this figure in abstract notation, we will have two figures in narrow notation. It is also interesting here, as many aspects in linguistic, in relational network theories, in relational networks, properly speaking, like the ones that we have here, that other linguistic systems are connected. Other cognitive systems like vision, like somatosensory system, like the audition system, are connected to the linguistic system. And such cognitive systems are, in their turn, connected to the parts of the body. For example, the visual cut is connected to the eyes. This belongs to the visual system. Cat fur is connected to the skin. This corresponds to the somatosensory system. The noise made by the cat is connected to the ears. This corresponds to the auditive system. As you see, the parts of the body are represented here in blocks because they are discrete, clearly separated units from different from the internal systems. But of course, that there are connections between those parts of the body, the different cognitive systems, and the linguistic system. This is very useful in order to reinterpret a very famous explanation provided by Saussure, or maybe by the editors of Saussure. The cat is the referent. It's in the real world. The significa, the concept, is part of the linguistic sign. In fact, we could say that relational network theories account for the Saussurean linguistic sign, but relational network theories posit clearly the referent outside the linguistic system. In some editions of the Cause de Linguistique Générale de Saussure, written by Saussure, which was prepared by the students on the basis of some class notes. For example, in the linguistic, when representing the linguistic sign, they propose the picture of a tree or a picture of a horse, but this is probably some misleading, because something a little bit misleading, because the picture of the tree, the picture of the horse should represent the referent, the element that is outside. Within the linguistic system, we only have differences. We only have networks of relationships. We only have value relationships. That's the word. That's the word that is used by Saussure. Those value relationships are clearly represented here in relational networks. For example, when we see, let's take a case here, for example, the differences between flying mouse, cat, stick, and many others, of course. Okay, so this is, as many concepts, many ideas are very interesting here. This one also helps us to suggest that there is a strong tradition that connects Saussure, Gensler, and Lamb, and that possibly Lamb has developed some, not only some concepts, but also some technical devices that help us to understand how those value relationships explained by Saussure and Gensler are clearly represented in the linguistic system. Here we have again that the reference is that the reference is outside. And if we have one network, one diagram for abstract notation, which are whose diagrams are bidirectional, we must present two diagrams in narrow notation. Here we have the same figure, which aims at being helpful in order to, when showing in different colors, different types of linguistic information. For example, in blue, we have lexical notes, okay? Lexicogrammatical notes, because we have the note for gato, cat, which is integrated by the stem of the word gat and the flexion, okay, which in Spanish means masculine, oh, which is a note probably in the linguistic system of at least some speakers. In yellow, we have phonological information. This is a convention, of course, but these colors have here only some illustrative function. And at the top of the figure, we have, in red, semantic or conceptual information notes. Let's say again that in black, the labels are not strictly part of the linguistic or the cognitive system. We have the secondary colors, for example, green, which for connections, because green lines are the ones who connect lexicogrammatical information with phonological information. Orange for the connections that, or the lines that connect precisely semantic information with lexicogrammatical information. Here we have violet. Maybe violet in order to, they could be violet, they could be red, I don't know. But here we have in dark blue some, this is not very clear at the top of the figure, I'm sorry, but the important fact is that, I mean, the colors are not clear, and not very tight, but we can also consider the fact that, again, meanings, or the linguistic meanings, concepts, are connected to information corresponding to other cognitive systems. For example, meow to the auditive system. This is cat visual. We have a cognitive representation of the vision of a cat, the cognitive representation of the feeling of cat first, and so on. All this information can be represented in relational networks. Okay. The second part that we could consider now is that I will make a brief reference to this, but it's a very important aspect of linguistic theory, of this linguistic theory. The first part of my presentation aimed at showing that there is strong relational network theory is compatible with linguistic evidence, with basic linguistic evidence. Sometimes we could say that relational network theory is compatible with basic linguistic evidence that cannot be accounted for other linguistic theories. I will ask just a general question. How generative linguistics could explain the difference between linguistic comprehension and linguistic production? A fact that is explained by relational network theory. How other linguistic theories could explain, as we will see, the cases of anomalous of anomalous or odd linguistic performances. Here we have that relational network theory aims at satisfying at least 3 requirements of plausibility. The first of them is operational plausibility, the second one is developmental plausibility, and the third one is neurological plausibility. Operational plausibility means that a linguistic theory has to provide a plausible account of how the linguistic system can be put into operation in real time to produce and understand speech. And this is something that we have already considered. We have already considered that representing, roughly speaking, meanings at the top, expressions at the bottom, relational network theory can provide a plausible account of how the linguistic system works, both for production and for understanding. We also see that this theory, relational network theory, provides a plausible account of how the linguistic system can be learned by children, and not only by children but also by adults, because this is an important asset of relational network theory, and it is a fact that it is assumed that language learning is a process that goes along all life, that it doesn't finish at 4 or 5 years old. And of course, it's also very important neurological plausibility. A realistic linguistic theory has to be compatible, or at least not incompatible, with what it is known about the brain from neurosciences. Let's remember that the title of main Lamb's book is precisely Senderos del Cerebro, Pathways of the Brain, the Neurocognitive Basis of Language. And in this book, he aims at accounting for neurological plausibility. Sorry. I'm sorry. Coming back. Some slides are repeated. Here. So there is neurological evidence in favor of relational hypothesis. Generally speaking, the hypothesis that linguistic information, that the linguistic system is a system of relationships. Most linguistic theories, Lamb suggests, account for the linguistic system as arrangements of symbols. But if we accept that the linguistic system is an arrangement of symbols, that we literally produce and understand symbols, there should be something like a device in the brain that can read information, and we should also need a symbol storage in order to consider that information. And not only that, also some additional devices to help us in the function of storing symbols. Against the hypothesis that our brain stores symbols, a more realistic alternative is to assume that the internal structure does not have symbolic representation of phonemes, morphemes, or lexemes, but, as we have said, the means for producing such forms in oral and written text, and the means from producing such forms are relational networks. Lamb admits that there are not, that we cannot, we do not have yet direct experimental data, at least for the phenomena corresponding to the microscopic level. We have a lot of information coming from, we have direct evidence coming from neuroimaging, but this is too general. Neuroimages help us to understand how, or not how, but where linguistic information is represented, not and where, and considering huge zones. Following the tradition of Wernicke and Broca, we know, for example, that phonological comprehension is represented in the temporal lobe, but those valuable tradition of research, this valuable tradition of research cannot account for the fact cannot account for information, for linguistic information at the very microscopic level. We also have experiments coming from works with animals, for example, monkeys, cats, rats, even dogs, which have visual, auditory, and somatosensory perception, but of course, they don't have linguistic systems, or at least they don't have linguistic systems as that can be considered as developed as human linguistic system. So we have to consider indirect neurological evidence according to LAMP, and research in neuroscience provides empirical grounds to believe that relational hypotheses are possible. The first of all is that the cerebral cortex as a whole is a network, that learning occurs through the strengthening of neural connections. This is something that is compatible with relational network theory. And on this basis, it can be suggested that linguistic information lies in the connectivity. Here we have a figure that represents the possible learning of the lexical node. We could say the word gol in Spanish-speaking little kid, in little baby, maybe a boy, a girl of 1, 2 years old, can learn the word gol, making reference to ball, pelota. The word ball is usually mentioned as goal. Football is very important in my country, so the word goal is used for instead of goal, instead of ball, pelota. And it's relatively easy to learn because it's only one syllable, and very many little kids say goal instead of pelota, making reference to ball. How's this process of learning? Okay, the red circle aims at representing the lexical node for goal. The yellow circle aims at representing the phonological node for the sequence goal, and the blue node aims at representing the semantic node for ball, pelota, the meaning, the representation of a ball in the cognitive system of a little kid. When the meaning of ball and the sequence for goal send activation at the same time for a new node, for a node that has not been activated yet, that kid creates a node, creates a lexical node. And in its turn, this lexical node that was latent before is established at that moment and sends activation both to the meaning, that's why we have the number 2 there, to the node corresponding to the meaning and to the node corresponding to the phonological information. And that's a good account of why our linguistic system is a linguistic of 3 levels. This is something that Halliday has extensively explained. First, we have, when we are very little babies, we have a proto-language. We connect directly some meanings with some signals. For example, the baby cries in order to make reference to something, to the food he wants to be given. But by the first year of life, we begin to create lexical nodes. The creation of a lexical node is the creation of a new node that establishes a connection to phonological and semantic information. Well, all these relational hypotheses are compatible with what is known about the brain thanks to neuroscience. Lamb has extensively explained that the nodes of linguistic relational networks, that sometimes he called simply nextions, can be implemented as cortical columns at the neurological level. So this is a fact that helps us to show that relational hypotheses have neurological plausibility. And the nodes are organized in a hierarchical network, and each layer integrates the features of the lower level and sets anti-activation to higher levels. Lamb mentions the valuable work of Vernon Mountcastle, who suggested that the cortical mini-column is the smallest processing unit of the cortex, of the cortex of the brain, of course. Mountcastle also suggests that all cellular studies at the auditory cortex of cats and monkeys provide direct evidence that the cortex is organized in columns. Which are columns? Which are cortical columns? Well, they are real elements, they are actual elements in the brain cortex. The cerebral cortex is organized as a mosaic of cortical columns, and the basic processing unit in the cerebral cortex is a bundle of several mini columns, not just an individual mini column. Of course, that we are talking about microscopic units, and that the diameter of a cell body within a cortical column is considered in microns. A micron being the millionésima, that is to say, it's 1 in a million part of a meter. Well, there are some research that has shown that this is in neurological terms, that cortical columns are the elements that by means of which cognitive information is represented. This is a passage from Mountcastle's book, Neurocognitive, which is perceptive neuroscience. In one of the many experiments that he provides, it is shown that when there is a nerve regeneration, they can identify that the cortical columns in the brain that were used to control some parts in the hand of the monkey, those cortical columns change after the particular part of the nerves of the hand of the monkey are cut and then regenerated. This piece of research helps to identify not only cortical columns, but also the possible size of such cortical columns. So there is something like a risky but attractive extrapolation presented by Lamb, and it is the fact that linguistic nodes are implemented as cortical columns, because cortical columns have different functions. They are not only excitatory but also inhibitory. Linguistic nodes could not be implemented as isolated neurons, because some neurons are excitatory, some neurons are inhibitory, and a node in the linguistic system is both excitatory and inhibitory. Sometimes it not only activates other nodes, but it also sends inhibitory information. For example, one antonym may send inhibitory information precisely to its antonym. Okay, just to mention that, there is, we could highlight the fact that relational network theory have neurological plausibility, that there is a compatibility between the nodes and connections of relational networks and cortical columns and their connections. We have at least 12 characteristics of actual cortical columns and their connections that are present also in linguistic nodes and linguistic connections. That is to say, first Lamb suggests that linguistic nodes and linguistic connections have certain characteristics. When he analyzes neurological information, he confirms that such characteristics are also present in actual neural nodes and connections. So this could be, roughly speaking, the argument in favor of the neurological possibility of relational networks. First, the nodes of relational networks are implemented with high degree of abstraction and generality as cortical columns. The connection of relational networks are implemented with a high degree of abstraction and generality, of course, and neuronal fibers and connections. Cortical columns and neuronal fibers form or integrate cortical connection, and the conclusion is that relational networks represent, with a high degree of abstraction, real brain connections, real actual neural connections. There are also some quantitative estimates, but this is too long. Maybe later I will share this presentation and, of course, bibliographical references with you. But I would like to mention finally that not only this aspect dealing with the neurological plausibility of relational networks, but finally, I would like to share with you the hypothesis that that relational network theory is able to account for anomalous, odd, strange, rare cases that other linguistic theories simply cannot consider. For example, it has been considered, it has been shown, it has been exposed that relational network theory can account for cases like these. Pope Francis, some years ago, says something like that. Se ognuno di noi non accumula ricchezze. Okay, it's in Italian. He used, instead of saying in questo caso, he said in questo cazzo. The word cazzo is, it's a slang, it's a bad word in Italian, maybe also in Argentina, which is a country that has been influenced by a powerful Italian immigration. So it could be interpreted as a slip of the tongue, as a lapsus linguae. Why did Pope Francis said cazzo instead of cazzo? Well, here we have another example. Some years ago, President Bush said, "Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so we are. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we." A lot of people interpreted that George Bush, by means of this lapsus, confessed that he was thinking about harming the people of the USA. Okay. Relational network theories can help to support that hypothesis. Of course, that relational network theory cannot be inside the Pope Francis mind or President Bush mind, but it can explain why some people interpret that when Pope Francis said cazzo instead of caso, he was thinking something negative about the capitalist system, or maybe why when President Bush said harm instead of protect, he was thinking about harming American people. Here we have figure 9, the sleep of cazzo by Pope Francis. As you see, we have caso, which is example, that has not been strongly activated. That is to say, some words, some meanings have not been strongly activated, and on the other hand, some meanings were strongly activated. I'm sorry, can I ask you for 30 seconds? I have to go to the next room.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
30 seconds.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I would just comment on something that John Paul, who has joined us, meanwhile, hi John Paul, mentions in the chat about the colors. Yes, so yes, I think they are also a useful notational device that has never been included in the notation system. But I think they can neatly show how what traditional linguistics treat as different kind of linguistic information would be represented in these networks. But again, just like labels, these will be just a notational device, right?
Exactly.
But very helpful. True.
Yes. Helpful in presentations, helping in learning and teaching.
Yeah, true.
You know, I envision things like you have a big diagram and you show, you know, the part you want to look at. You know, this connection leads down to this one and this one and this one, and you show that pathway. So you have pathways of different colors.
Hi, I'm here again. I'm sorry. What were you asking?
No, we're just commenting on the way you represented different parts of the network by colors. John Paul was mentioning in the chat that he had always considered that approach very useful of using colors. So we're just talking about that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
But yeah, go ahead and resume your presentation. Yes.
It may be a didactic simplification, but it can be helpful.
Exactly.
Okay, we are mentioning that, sorry for this, I had to give a key to a colleague. We have the case that Pope Francis said some time ago, questo cazzo instead of questo caso. He corrected himself immediately, but the case is that he mentioned that word. And cazzo, it's a bad word. It's in Italian. It means it is connected to the meanings that you have here. And as we know, or at least as many of us consider in Argentina, Pope Francis didn't like open economy. He had the traditional feeling of that it will be hardest for a rich person to go from paradise than from a camel to go across the little life of a needle and things like that. So he associated all the things dealing with open economy, maybe wealth, maybe rich people, with that word. And that's why he made explicit the word cazzo instead of caso. Can we be completely sure about that? Of course not, but we can account for the fact that probably this is what happened in the linguistic system of the Pope, and very probably this is what happened in the linguistic system of some hearers of the Pope at that moment. There is here in figure 10 we have another example. George Bush said during one of his speeches, our enemies, that the enemies of the USA were thinking about new ways, to harm their country and their people. And neither do we, he said. By maybe implying that he was also thinking about harming the people of the US. We could infer that protect, the meaning for protect, had less activation than harm. Harm was more strongly activated, and that's simply why he said harm instead of protect. That's an explanation. That's a very straightforward explanation in terms of relational networks. And we can also distinguish between intended meaning and unintended meaning. This is very interesting because we can, hearers maybe can elaborate a hypothesis about intended meaning and about the unintended meaning that finally was transmitted. This is a very interesting case because most linguistic theories dealing with the study of communication concentrate on intention, on intended meaning. Consider, for example, pragmatics, consider relevance theory. When they account for communication, a communication according to those theories is based on the transmission of intended meanings and the recognition of such intended meanings. Where, according to linguistic theories, every meaning is part of linguistic communication, even including unintended meanings. For example, when Bush, here, case 3, said, "Our enemies never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we can consider that Bush intended to communicate that he was thinking about how to protect the USA and the people. But finally, he communicated that he was thinking how to harm the USA and the people of the USA. In any case, communication, as we said before, is much more complex than the transmission and recognition of intentions. Lamb has suggested that perfect communication only exists when the linguistic and cognitive system of the speaker is exactly the same as the linguistic and cognitive system of the hearer, that is to say, never. And we have some anomalous and strange cases that are clearly accounted for in terms of relational network theories. This is an example taken from another author, but analyzed by Lamb. The attorney, this is a case of misunderstanding. The attorney asks, "Mrs. Jones, is your appearance here this morning pursuant to a deposition notice which I sent you to your attorney? And the witness answers, "No, this is how I dress when I go to work." Here we have an unintended pun. The teacher asks, "What do you know about her?" And the student answers, "I have no idea." And he's sincere. He doesn't aim at pun non-intended here. We have many creative names of shops and different instances, but when considering shops and business, we have very creative names. Here we have the name Schnapsidee in German, which is the name of a liquor store. We can also consider poetic creativity. Well, here we have an example in Mapudungun, a case of oxymoron. Here it says, "Inkin mapu kumen ul kaltumulei ni wenumapu," which means the song of our good earth in its land above. It has some oxymoron. It's a type of oxymoron here. We have some kind of oxymoron here because it's being implied that the land above is here on earth and vice versa. This could be a case of creative instance of language. But let's go to explain the case of misunderstanding. What happened here? It can be explained in relational terms. The attorney, you remember, asked, "Mrs. Jones, is your appearance here this morning pursuant to a deposition notice which I sent you to attorney?" And the lady answers, "No, this is how I dress when I go to work." There's a mistake here, sorry. What happened here? Figure A represents the linguistic system of the lawyer, of the attorney. This is the attorney's utterance. The meaning presence in court, presence in law court activated the lexemic node for appearance. And in its turn, the lexemic node for appearance activated the phonological nodes, which enable the speaker to say what he said. But on the other hand, in the linguistic system of the hearer, in the linguistic system of the witness, the lexemic node for appearance activated the meaning look and not arrivals or performance at the law court. This is how relational network theory can account for a misunderstanding. It is simply the fact that one of the individuals involved in communication activated some meanings that were not activated by the others. And this is directly represented in relational terms. Here we have an unintended pun. The student that answered, I have no idea. Idea is a term that is clear, is the key term in Hegel's philosophy. And idea connects upward both to thought and Hegel's idea. The student who said, I have no idea, he was simply saying that he didn't know, that he didn't have any thought, any literal idea, any thought about this philosopher, about this man, but he unexpectedly generated a pun. Unintended puns are interpretations which are or relational networks that are represented maybe in the system of the hearer, but not represented in the system of the speaker. This is very interesting. Here we have an intended pun, an intentional pun based on a creative name, Schnapsidee. Schnapp is integrated by Schnaps, an idea. Schnapp is equal, an idea is the idea, and Schnapsidee is a crazy idea, and it's also connected to the name of the store, which is also fun, which also evokes fun, evokes crazy ideas, whatever. Creative, this helps to see, to consider that the creative dimension of the linguistic system, or the creative nature of language users, is much more complex than the generative conception of creative nature of language. According to Chomsky, the creative nature of language deals with the capacity, the ability, I'm not being technical now, of speakers to generate, to produce utterances, or let's say sentences, that they had not considered before. But this only corresponds to the syntactic level. This is maybe a relatively poor conception of the creative nature of language. On the other hand, relational network theory helps us to show that the creative nature of language has to do with different levels of a linguistic system, at least the connection between the lexicogrammatical level or the lexical level and meanings. The creative nature of language has to do here with the possibility of establishing connections between concepts, terms, meanings that had not been connected before. Well, here we have a verse in Mapuche, in a Mapuche song, that evokes the idea that the sky is in the land, and that in the earth, and that the earth is in the land. There is something here. When Umapu connects to a sky, but inhibits earth, and Mapu inhibits sky, but this double inhibition may be evokes the appearance of a new meaning. There is a new term, ulcantum, song. I mean, mapu, which is earth, inhibits wenumapu, which is the sky, and sky inhibits earth. Something cannot be at the same time at earth and at sky, but the song can be at the same time at the earth and at the sky. So ulcantun inhibits the inhibition. This is a complex interpretation that we could consider. And in fact, we can suggest that this complex poetic device that is called oxymoron maybe consists in the inhibition of inhibitions. For example, if we say the dark light, which is a very canonical example of oxymoron, the dark light, or a cold fire. The inhibition is what being inhibited here, and maybe such oxymoron helps us to evoke the complex nature of human condition and so on. This is in fact, it's very complex. We could be talking about these examples about oxymorons during all the lecture, during all day long. But it's another case by means of which we can suggest that relational network theory can account for all the cases, not only for unintended puns, not only for creative names of particular stores, for misunderstandings, for unintended puns, for intended puns, but also for poetic fragments. Conclusion. The conclusion that I can share with you is that, okay, relational network theory helps us to consider that the so-called marginal cases illuminate the dual nature of linguistic networks. Even errors can help us to understand the complex nature of the linguistic system. And maybe all these marginal cases, in fact, are not so marginal at all, but on the other hand, they reveal the very nature of the linguistic system. Okay, and that's all, at least for today. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry for being in black, but okay, my face is not something valuable to see, but on the other hand, the information presented by relational networks is really valuable. Okay, maybe you have some questions, some comments, some ideas to share.
Thank you so much, Jose. I
Thank
think your presentation successfully managed to combine a sort of pedagogical, didactical approach in the first part, where I think you explained very well the basics of RNT with some of the research you've been doing on these anomalous cases. At least that's my impression. So seeing all those icons on the screen, I think most of the people in the audience think the same. So yeah, thanks a lot. If there are any questions, I think we can spend a few minutes. And I think I see John Paul raising his hand. Sorry if there's someone else, but let's start with John Paul's question. Go ahead.
Okay, I have two little things. One is I find it interesting that you said you can only do live experiments on animals, but they don't do linguistic processing comparable to that of human beings. That gives me a chance to promote a CELINE talk a couple months from now from Chris Golston of Fresno State, who when he comes on, you might want to make that assertion to him and see what you get back, because he does some. He's done some work on that suggests at least maybe there's like what I call like a proto-linguistic processing in animals. So that's one point that'd be interesting to see some dialogue on when Professor Golston comes. And another little remark. My favorite Bushism, and he had plenty of. They were always very amusing. We had lots of fun with them at the time. Was misunderestimate. The word misunderestimate, which is still called a malapropism, but I say it's a valid coinage because it's like horizontal and vertical. Not only are you underestimating me as if on a vertical gradient, but you're misestimating. You're not even on that gradient. It's like horizontal and vertical. You're doubly off. So misunderestimate. It'd be interesting to relationally network how that one came about.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. It's very interesting. First of all, dealing with language communication, or dealing with animal communication or with animal language, according to relational network theory, the question is not whether animals have language or not have language, but how much language do they have. In fact, it is possible to suggest that many animals, for example, cats and dogs that share everyday life with us, are able to recognize linguistic information, and that at some level they must have something that is connected with human language. And there have been many valuable pieces of research that have shown that many animals like dolphins and gorillas are able to communicate with human beings by means of what we call human language. And then the different cases of Bushisms and other cases of lapsus linguae are very interesting because dealing according to relational network theory, it can be said that some meanings are more strongly activated than others, and due to that, those meanings send more activation, and that's why some words, let's say, is chosen instead of another one. That's why, for example, Bush said harm instead of protect. In other cases, considering, for example, President Bush, relational network theory is able to explain that the object of linguistic theory is simply the individual, is simply every person, and that every linguistic system is unique, that there are not two linguistic systems that are exactly the same, that there is not something like the ideal speaker here that Chomsky presented some time ago. So there are some, for example, meanings or lexical nodes that are exclusive of some person, and that's the way by means of which we could explain why President Bush or anyone talks as he or she talks.
If I may add just one or two more things. So thank you, John Paul, for advertising one of our next sessions. Chris Goldstone will be at CELINE actually in June, so in about 2 months from now. He will talk about what he calls animal grammar, and I think, like just to give you a small what that's called when you reveal some information about a movie.
Maybe a hint?
No, well, it doesn't matter.
Preview?
No, like when you say information related to the end of the movie, you shouldn't do that.
Spoil.
Spoiler, yeah. So just to give us
don't want to spoil it. Okay.
a short spoiler, I think that Chris Goldstone's main statement would be that animals don't really lack language, what they lack is speech. So I leave you with that. We will be more than happy to have you in our June session. And I will also take the opportunity to promote John Paul's talk, will be next month, because he's been doing some work on a glossary of RNT-related terms and some other stuff. So he will talk more about that next month. Okay, so that's what I wanted to add. If there are any other questions, I think we still have about 10 minutes. I'm trying. Yeah, I think Theodora has a raised hand. Yes, Theodora, please go ahead. I must mention Theodora is one of the master students that I mentioned at the beginning of this session. So go ahead.
Great.
Thank you for your presentation. It was highly interesting. If I may ask a question about where the networks are located, because in the previous part, I think I heard that you mentioned the cortical system and that the nodes are located in the cerebral cortex, if I understood correctly. Could you please develop a bit more about the anatomy or of where they might be located?
Well, it's a good and very hard question. According to the orthodox interpretation of relational network theory, relational networks should be located at the cortical level, yeah, because they account for linguistic information, that is, and linguistic information which is strongly connected with the information of other cognitive systems, and all this type of information corresponds to a cortical level, yeah. And that's the orthodox or the correct interpretation of the theory developed in Pathways of the Brain and other articles, and also the information represented by many other authors. But I think that the question is very interesting, it's very relevant, because it should be acknowledged that linguistic information and other cognitive information, maybe visual information, olfactory information, is also connected to other brain levels, for example, to the levels corresponding to emotions, which are in the limbic system. But this is a fact that is, we have to admit it, it's not completely developed, at least by now, within the frame of relational network theory. But trying to be concrete and simple with the answer, relational network theories are like very little maps, very little figures of what's going on and what's the structure of some part of the cortical structure of a real individual. I think that at least this is my interpretation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm still a beginner and interested in learning more about anatomy, neuroscience, and that's why I felt asking the questions. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure listening.
It's a very relevant question. If you see the book Pathways of the Brain, which was published in 1999, maybe it's relatively, it's not a very recent book, but the last chapters of the book, I can send you the book, the PDF, both in English and Spanish.
Thank you.
The last chapters of the book provide a general explanation of those locations. For example, it accounts for the fact that it develops a general anatomy of language. But your question is very interesting because concrete relational network theory cannot be represented in a certain point of the brain because we would, well, it could be represented in the case we have a general representation of what happens at the microscopic level.
I see. Okay. And is the cortical system involved as well in learning or language?
Yes, of course. Of course, all
Okay.
the process of all this process of learning, of creating, for example, the process of creating, of learning a new word. This is something that happens at the cortical level. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for taking your time in answering.
Okay.
I also had a question, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
So first of all, thank you for your presentation. You were saying something about the explanatory power of relational network theory. And it's interesting that it can explain these weird cases. But I was thinking about how RNT would explain complex syntax, and also how it would explain phenomena of language change across time. Is that explored or?
Very, very good questions. Language change, for example, and language and code switching and language change is a phenomenon that has been investigated by Paul. Paul himself has considered many aspects of those problems. In fact, your question is completely relevant because we said we should demand a concrete linguistic theory to account for every linguistic phenomenon. If it aims at being a completely realistic theory of language. And you mentioned syntactic structures, very complex syntactic structures and language change. First of all, there are concrete studies about syntactic structures. Some time ago, for example, I published an article about a relational account of the Spanish noun phrase. I will share this article with you. Paul has studied, for example, some structures in Spanish and Romanian, and Adolfo published a book in which he analyzed cases in different languages. So, of course, this is a good challenge, and this is something that has to be explained by this theory. In this case, the answer is yes. Has relational network theory explained or considered complex syntactic structures? Yes, it has, and there are examples. I can show you a concrete example about the very complex Spanish noun phrase. And I also aimed at accounting for some aspects of Mapudungun recently, the language spoken by Mapuches. I can also send you this information by email. I can send you the complete PDF. And the other fact that you mentioned was linguistic change. Well, this is a very interesting question because we can assume that phenomenon we call linguistic change, because it's a very good question, because linguistic relational network theory aims at accounting for the linguistic system within the individual. And considering linguistic change from this perspective, it can be said that the linguistic system is changing permanently all the time. My linguistic system is not the same now as it was yesterday and as it will be tomorrow. So there is one dimension of linguistic change that should be considered within the very linguistic system of the individual. But there is another dimension of the question that you ask that is very interesting, and it deals with the it deals with the with linguistic change that has been traditionally considered in linguistic theory, that is medieval English, modern English, Latin as the origin of all Latin languages that are spoken today, like Romanian, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and so on. And in that case, we could analyze perfectly linguistic change by means of constructing relational networks that help us to show how connections between lexical, conceptual, and phonological nodes were in different parts of history. And I don't know if I am clear with that, but of course, that linguistic change is it's an issue that can also be dealt with relational networks. For example, we could show, I don't know, not only linguistic change across the time, but also linguistic change dealing with dialects and varieties of certain language in different regions. But this is also very interesting because to some extent that questions like that help also us to understand that we call, for example, Spanish, Romanian, or English is a high level of abstraction that is built on the basis of individual cases, individual systems that has some overlaps that allows us to suggest that there is something like English, like Spanish, like Romanian. But the answer is that yes, that linguistic change within the individual or considering the linguistic system can be understood in relational terms. I don't know any specific reference in this case, but it could be the case that, for example, in a very simple case, it could be, for example, shown that a simple lexical node was connected to some meanings in some period and to others in other. Or maybe it could be shown that the phonological system of the English language during the times of Shakespeare was different from the phonological system of current English. And of course that it could be straightforwardly represented in relational terms.
Adding to that, if I may, I would say my view on this language change question is the following. Generally, even in social linguistics, issues related to language change are not always clarified. I mean, the position one has in dealing with them is not always clarified between a synchronic approach and diachronic approach. Now, typically, language change is viewed as a diachronically developing phenomena, right? So, so it's also seen as a phenomena having to do with languages as systems, not with speech. But what happens usually, is that those diachronic changes are due to some phenomena occurring in the speech of certain individuals at a certain moment, which later can become the local norm and can be transmitted to future generations, and they become changes of that language, not only the speech. Now, since most language change is rooted in speech phenomena, those speech phenomena being related also to either language contact, either innovative cases, metaphors and stuff like that, those can be readily explained in relational terms. So we can show actually what happens, if you want, at the moment zero, when the first person said, I don't know, foot of the mountain, using the word foot for the mountain, creating an innovative metaphor, right? We can show in relational diagrams how that rewiring of the individual system happens. Now, what happens after that is that the individual being a member of a community, this innovative form can spread. That's, let's say, a bit outside of the scope of R&T, because as José mentioned, R&T tries to understand what happens at the level of one individual, but R&T can explain what happens at that moment zero. How are those things related to language change rooted in individual cases of innovative cases, or as I said, language contact cases, calcs, code switching and stuff like that. So that would be my position.
Great. Great, thank you.
Okay. So it's been a while since we had a CELINE meeting that went beyond the 2 hours. That's great. It means that it was a very interesting talk. So maybe if there is any last question. Okay. If not, I will thank again José for his presentation. Thank you everybody for being with us tonight. José will send me the presentation and I will send it to everyone.
Okay, yes. The presentation and other bibliographic references.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and sorry for the screen, but maybe the most important part of the presentation was to consider LAMP's ideas.
Yes. Great. Well, thanks again. And we'll be back next month with John Paul, and 2 months' time with Chris. I will send all the info by email as usual. Thanks a lot. Have a great night, afternoon, wherever you are. So see you next time.
Buen día a todos. Saludos.
Hasta luego. La revedere.
Hasta luego.